So there I was, Jake Morrison, professional coffee spiller and part-time maintenance engineer aboard the cargo freighter Lucky Break, when my entire life decided to take a hard left turn into crazy town. One minute I'm fixing a busted hyperdrive coupling. The next minute I'm standing in what can only be described as the galaxy's most aggressively purple arena, surrounded by approximately 50,000 screaming aliens who apparently think I'm some kind of gladiator. Now let me paint you a picture. The galactic coliseum of inevitable doom, as the locals cheerfully call it, looks like someone took a football stadium, painted it the color of grape soda, and then let a committee of sadistic interior designers loose on it. The seats stretch up into the artificial atmosphere, packed with every conceivable variety of tentacled, scaled, and otherwise bizarrely configured sentient life forms, all united in their apparent desire to watch me get turned into human pudding. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary biological configurations, booms a voice that sounds like a freight train having an argument with a foghorn. Welcome to today's exhibition match. This charming fellow turns out to be Vex, the arena's head commentator, a 7-foot-tall blue creature who apparently missed the memo that subtlety exists. Today we witness the galaxy's newest joke species attempt to survive more than 30 seconds in actual combat. His broadcasting partner, Clint, sounds like he's been gargling gravel and disappointment for the past century. Vex, I've seen this human species file. Their planet is mostly water, they can't even photosynthesize, and they voluntarily consume ethanol for recreation. I give him 15 seconds before he becomes an interesting stain on the arena floor. Here's the thing nobody bothered to mention during my impromptu kidnapping. Apparently humans have a reputation in galactic society. Not a good reputation, mind you. We're basically considered the cosmic equivalent of that friend who shows up to a knife fight with a pool noodle and somehow thinks everything will work out fine. The galaxy at large views us as soft, squishy, pathetically weak creatures who somehow manage to stumble into space travel through sheer dumb luck and an alarming tendency to ignore basic safety protocols. Excuse me. I call out to what I assume is a referee, though it's hard to tell since it looks like a cross between a mushroom and a tax auditor. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm just here to fix your hyperdrive motivator. It's making this really concerning grinding noise, and honestly, your entire power coupling system is held together with what appears to be hope and alien duct tape. The mushroom referee makes a noise like a broken garbage disposal and waves several appendages in what I choose to interpret as dismissive gestures. Apparently there's no mistake. According to the paperwork that someone definitely forged, I'm now officially registered as Earth's representative in something called the Tournament of Glorious Death, which sounds exactly as fun as you'd expect. The crowd's excitement reaches fever pitch as my first opponent enters the arena. It's a creature that looks like someone crossed a rhinoceros with a blender and then gave the resulting nightmare anger management issues. It has approximately 17 horns, teeth that belong in a hardware store, and what appear to be built-in flamethrowers. Its name, according to Vex's enthusiastic introduction, is Gorthak the Disemboweler. While I mutter, adjusting my tool belt and wondering if my insurance covers interdimensional gladiatorial combat, this is either going to be the shortest fight in galactic history or the most embarrassing. The crowd seems to agree with option 1. Let me tell you something about panic. It makes you surprisingly creative. When Gorthak the Disemboweler charged at me with all the subtlety of a freight train having a bad day, my brain immediately went into what I like to call desperate maintenance engineer mode. You know that feeling when the reactor's about to blow and you've got exactly 47 seconds to jury-rig a solution using nothing but spare parts and stubborn determination? Yeah, that. So naturally, I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with 17 horns and a bad attitude. I dove behind the nearest piece of arena equipment, which happened to be some kind of ornamental death trap designed to look like a decorative fountain. Oh, would you look at that? Vex announces with the enthusiasm of someone discovering free pizza. The human is employing what appears to be a tactical retreat. How quaint. Clint, ever the optimist, adds, I've seen this before. It's called delay the inevitable. The human will tire himself out running in circles until Gorthak gets bored and puts him out of his misery. Here's what they didn't count on Gorthak. Being roughly the size and intelligence of a very angry building, couldn't exactly make sharp turns. When he tried to follow me around the fountain, momentum became his enemy. Physics, as it turns out, doesn't care how many horns you have. He crashed into the decorative death trap with enough force to register on seismic equipment, immediately got his horns tangled in the ornate metalwork, and spent the next 5 minutes thrashing around like the galaxy's angriest wind chime. While he was busy having an existential crisis about basic geometry, I noticed the fountain's control panel was sparking. Being a maintenance engineer, I did what came naturally. I fixed it. Took about 30 seconds to reroute the power flow and stop the dangerous electrical discharge that could have seriously hurt someone. Unfortunately, when I restored power to the fountain, it turns out the decorative part was actually a high-pressure water jet system designed to, well, let's just say it wasn't designed for decoration. The sudden blast of pressurized water hit Gortak at exactly the wrong angle, launched him across the arena like a very confused missile, and deposited him unconscious in the safety barrier. The arena went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop, if pins existed in space, and weren't immediately incinerated by the arena's atmospheric processors. Did the human just defeat Gortak the Disemboweler by fixing a fountain? Vex's voice cracked like a teenage boy asking someone to prom. My second opponent was Zar the Venom Queen, a spider-like creature about the size of a small house with a charming personality that made Gortak look like a therapy dog. She had this neat trick where she could spit acid that could melt through 12 inches of reinforced durasteel. She also had what turned out to be a pretty serious design flaw. All those eyes meant she had absolutely no depth perception. When she started spitting acid, I just walked in a straight line toward her. Every shot missed by exactly the same margin, because she couldn't figure out how far away I actually was. Meanwhile, her acid was eating through the arena's support pillars, which seemed like a structural engineering nightmare waiting to happen. So I did what any responsible maintenance worker would do. I started directing her fire toward the obviously overloaded support columns that were clearly violating about 17 different safety codes. 5 minutes later, she'd helpfully demolished the section of arena that was about to collapse anyway, buried herself under approximately 3 tons of purple rubble, and I'd inadvertently prevented what would have been a catastrophic structural failure. This is unprecedented. Vex screams, and he actually sounds scared now. The human appears to be employing some kind of advanced tactical construction demolition. By my 4th victory, which involved accidentally poisoning a plant creature with the chlorinated water from my emergency hydration pack, the crowd had stopped cheering and started what I can only describe as nervous whimpering. The other tournament contestants were huddled in their preparation chambers, probably Googling how to file for conscientious objector status in 17 different alien languages. And me? I was just trying to figure out how to call my supervisor to explain why I was going to be late for my shift. While I was busy trying to find a decent sandwich in an arena concession stand that apparently specialized in serving things that were still moving, the galaxy's finest scientific minds were having what I can only describe as a collective nervous breakdown. Dr. Clith, the Galactic Council's chief xenobiologist, had been studying humans for exactly 47 minutes and was already reaching for his emergency anxiety medication. This makes no sense. He chittered to his research team, all of whom looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else in the known universe. According to every biological model we have, humans should be dead. Not just dead, but spectacularly, embarrassingly dead. His assistant, a creature that looked like a very concerned mushroom with a PhD, pulled up the human biological data on their holographic display. Look at this, Dr. Clith. They're persistence predators. Do you understand what that means? The research team exchanged glances that suggested they very much did not want to understand what that meant. It means. The assistant continued with the tone of someone explaining why the universe was fundamentally broken, that on their home planet, they used to hunt animals by just following them. For days, sometimes weeks. They'd just keep walking after their prey until the animal literally died of exhaustion. Dr. Clith's breathing apparatus made a sound like a deflating balloon. But they look so harmless. They're soft. They don't have claws or fangs or natural armor or even decent night vision. That's the horrifying part, another researcher added, pulling up more data that made everyone in the room wish they'd chosen different careers. They don't need any of that. They just don't stop. Ever. Their entire evolutionary strategy is based on being the most terrifyingly patient species in the galaxy. Meanwhile, back in the arena, I'd found a decent turkey sandwich and was having a pretty good day, all things considered. Sure, I was apparently trapped in some kind of gladiatorial combat situation, but the pay-per-view royalties were looking pretty decent, and honestly, after 3 years of fixing hyperdrive motivators, fighting for my life was almost relaxing. My fifth opponent was something called a phase wraith, which could apparently become incorporeal at will, and had been undefeated for the past 2 centuries. The crowd was finally showing some enthusiasm again, and probably because they figured that even a human couldn't accidentally defeat something that didn't technically exist in normal space-time. They were wrong, of course. The thing about phase wraiths, as I discovered entirely by accident, is that when they phase out of normal reality, they become extremely vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. And the thing about maintenance engineers is that we carry a lot of equipment that generates electromagnetic fields as a side effect of doing useful work. I was trying to fix the arena's malfunctioning atmospheric recycler, which was making this really annoying humming noise, but when the phase wraith charged at me in full incorporeal mode, the electromagnetic pulse from my field generator hit it at exactly the wrong moment, locked it halfway between dimensions, and left it stuck in a state that I can only describe as aggressively translucent and deeply embarrassed. The human Vex announced in a voice that suggested he was reevaluating some major life choices, appears to have trapped the phase wraith in a temporal spatial paradox, using what looks like a standard-issue field generator. Back in the research lab, Dr. Clith was pulling up humanity's discovery of fire, agriculture, and space travel. "Look at this timeline," he said, pointing at the display with an appendage that was definitely trembling. "From stone tools to interstellar travel in less than 10,000 years, most species take 50 times that long. They're not just patient," his assistant realized with growing horror. "They're patient, and they learn fast. And they're tool users," another researcher added helpfully. "Obsessive tool users. They make tools to make other tools to make better tools. It's tools all the way down." Dr. Clith stared at the data for a long moment, then reached for his emergency communication device. "Get me the Galactic Council. Now, we need to discuss immediately reclassifying human space as a quarantine zone." But it was too late for that, because I was already on my sandwich break and accidentally solving the universe's problems one maintenance issue at a time. By the time the tournament reached the championship round, the Galactic Council had held 3 emergency sessions. The arena's insurance company had declared bankruptcy, and approximately half the galaxy's military commanders were updating their strategic defense plans to include a new category labeled human contingency protocols. But all of that bureaucratic panic was nothing compared to the genuine, old-fashioned terror that rippled through the arena when they announced the final opponent, Rax the Bone Render. Now, I'd like to take a moment to properly introduce Krax, because calling him a final boss would be like calling a supernova a bright light. Krax stood 12 feet tall and was built like someone had decided that a gorilla wasn't quite intimidating enough, so they'd crossed it with a tank and given the whole thing anger management issues and a graduate degree in creative violence. He'd been the undisputed champion of the Tournament of Glorious Death for 847 years. His fight record was 3,847 wins, 0 losses, and a statistical average of 4.3 seconds per victory. The longest anyone had ever lasted against him was 12 seconds, and that was only because it took him a while to catch his breath from laughing. Krax's weapon of choice was something called the Render Blade, which was less a sword and more a concentrated physics violation that happened to be sharp on one end. According to the arena's promotional materials, it could cut through reinforced durasteel, fold spacetime, and had once been used to carve a moon in half during what the records diplomatically described as a minor disagreement about parking spaces. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient configurations," Vex announced, though his usual enthusiasm had been replaced by what sounded like genuine existential dread, presenting the undefeated, undisputed, and frankly unreasonable champion of the Tournament of Glorious Death, Cracks the bone render. The crowd's reaction was interesting. Instead of cheering, they made a collective sound that was somewhere between worship and the noise you make when you realize you've forgotten to file your taxes. Some of the smaller aliens were actually praying, though whether they were praying for Crax's victory or for the structural integrity of the space-time continuum was unclear. Crax entered the arena like a natural disaster with a personal vendetta, and when he saw me standing there with my tool belt and the remains of my turkey sandwich, he did something that hadn't happened in over 8 centuries. He laughed. Not a mean laugh or a dismissive chuckle, but a genuine, delighted, completely unhinged laugh that made the arena's sound dampeners overload and probably violated several noise ordinances in neighboring star systems. "You," he said in a voice that sounded like someone gargling gravel in a cement mixer, "are the human that's been causing all this trouble?" "Well," I said, finishing my sandwich because waste not, want not, I wouldn't call it trouble exactly. More like a series of minor workplace incidents that got slightly out of hand. Crax leaned down until his face was approximately 18 inches from mine, and I got a really good look at his teeth, which belonged in a museum exhibit titled "Why Evolution Sometimes Has a Dark Sense of Humor." "Human," he said, with the kind of smile that made nearby small objects spontaneously combust, "I'm going to enjoy this." And that's when I made what was probably the most inappropriately timed observation in galactic history. "You know, you've got some serious dental plaque buildup there. When's the last time you had a proper cleaning?" The arena went so quiet you could hear individual atoms bumping into each other. Crax blinked once, twice, and then made a sound like a confused earthquake. "Did you just," he started, then stopped, apparently unsure how to finish a sentence that began with concern for his oral hygiene. "I'm just saying," I continued, "because apparently I have absolutely no sense of self-preservation. If you're going to be the face of galactic terror, you should probably invest in some basic dental care. First impressions matter, you know? What happened next is going to require some explanation, mostly because it violated so many fundamental laws of physics that the universe is probably still sending strongly worded letters to someone's cosmic complaint department." Crax raised the render blade above his head with both hands, channeled approximately 17 different types of destructive energy into its edge, and brought it down in what he later described as the most devastating attack I have ever unleashed in 8 centuries of professional violence. The blade screamed through the air with enough force to level a small city. The energy discharge lit up every sensor in the arena and probably set off gravitational wave detectors in neighboring galaxies. The sheer kinetic energy of the strike was sufficient to crack the arena's reinforced foundation, which had been designed to withstand direct hits from antimatter torpedoes. And I stopped it with 2 fingers. Not because I'm secretly a cosmic-level superhero or because I'd been hiding mystical martial arts training. I stopped it because it was the most natural thing in the world to do. You see, when you spend your entire professional life working with tools and machinery, you develop what's called mechanical sympathy. You learn to feel how things want to move, where the stress points are, how force flows through structures. When something's about to break catastrophically, you can sense it before it happens. The render blade was basically a tool, just a really exotic one. And like any tool being used improperly, it was telegraphing its intentions about 3 seconds before it actually did anything. So when Crax brought it down, I could see exactly where the force vector was headed, exactly how the energy was channeled through the blade's structure, and exactly where I needed to apply pressure to redirect all that destructive power into the arena floor instead of my face. I reached up with my index and middle fingers, caught the blade at precisely the right stress point, and guided it into the ground about 6 inches to my left, where it carved a perfectly neat hole, approximately 3 feet deep. The arena went dead silent. Not quiet, not hushed, but actually silent in the way that space is silent, as if sound itself had decided to take a personal day. Crax stared at his blade buried harmlessly in the arena floor. Then he stared at my 2 fingers, which were completely unharmed. Then he stared at me with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was undergoing rapid and involuntary restructuring. "That's," he started, then stopped. Started again. Stopped again. His mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to solve calculus. "That's a nice blade," I said, mostly to fill the awkward silence. "Good balance, excellent energy channeling matrix, though I think your power coupling might be running a little hot. You might want to get that checked." Cracksex slowly, carefully pulled his weapon out of the ground and held it up to examine it. Then he looked at me. Then at the blade. Then at me again. "How?" he asked in a voice that had dropped to barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You were swinging a tool incorrectly, so I corrected the trajectory. Basic workplace safety, really." That's when Cracks did something that hadn't happened in the entire recorded history of the Tournament of Glorious Death. He set down his weapon, sat heavily on the arena floor, and put his head in his hands. 847 years, he muttered. 847 years of being the most feared warrior in known space, and I get defeated by workplace safety. "Oh, you're not defeated," I said, sitting down next to him because he looked like he needed the company. "You just need some basic ergonomics training. Here, let me show you the proper way to hold that thing." And that's how I accidentally broke the most feared warrior in the galaxy by giving him constructive feedback on his technique. The aftermath of what galactic historians would eventually call the two-finger incident was, to put it mildly, a complete organizational nightmare that somehow made everyone involved wish they'd chosen different careers. Within 6 hours of my victory, the Galactic Council had held an emergency session, declared a galaxy-wide state of mild panic, and passed Resolution 847B, which officially reclassified humans from harmless comic relief, a potential extinction-level event requiring immediate diplomatic attention. The resolution passed unanimously, mostly because the one council member who tried to argue for a less extreme classification was immediately shouted down by everyone else, who pointed out that they'd all just watched a maintenance engineer casually defeat the most feared warrior in known space by critiquing his technique. The human didn't just win, Dr. Clith explained to the emergency session while nervously adjusting his anxiety medication dispenser. He won by being helpful. He defeated Cracks the Bone Render by giving him ergonomics advice. Do you understand how terrifying that is? The council did understand, which is why they immediately passed 3 additional resolutions, one establishing a permanent embassy on Earth, one declaring humans an official protected species, that absolutely no one was allowed to annoy under any circumstances, and one setting aside a budget for what they diplomatically called preventive chocolate diplomacy. Meanwhile, back in the arena, I was having a pretty decent conversation with Cracks about proper weapon maintenance and the importance of regular equipment inspections. It turns out that under all that terrifying exterior, he was actually a pretty reasonable guy who'd just never had anyone explain to him that there were more efficient ways to apply destructive force. "You know," he said, examining his render blade with new appreciation after I'd helped him adjust the power coupling, "in 8 centuries, no one's ever given me constructive feedback before. Everyone just screams and tries to run away." "Well, that's not very helpful," I pointed out. "How are you supposed to improve your technique if no one tells you what you're doing wrong?" That's when Vex, who had been speechlessly watching our impromptu weapons maintenance tutorial, finally found his voice again. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted biological configurations," he announced in a tone that suggested he was still processing recent events. "For the first time in galactic history, we have a Tournament of Glorious Death champion who won by being considerate." The crowd's reaction was a mixture of confused applause, nervous laughter, and what sounded like several different species simultaneously reconsidering their life choices. 3 days later, I was aboard a luxury diplomatic transport headed back to Earth, officially titled Terrifying Human Ambassador, and carrying enough formal apologies from various alien governments to wallpaper my apartment. I also had a new friend in Cracks X who had decided to retire from professional violence and take up what he called constructive consultation in applied physics. The really funny part came when we arrived back at Earth and I was trying to explain to the hastily assembled United Nations Emergency Committee why I was suddenly the most important person in human space. "So let me get this straight," said the Secretary General, looking at the diplomatic credentials that officially made me Earth's first intergalactic ambassador. You accidentally conquered the galaxy by fixing things and being polite? I wouldn't say conquered, I replied, mostly because the term seemed a bit dramatic. More like I helped them realize that most of their problems could be solved with basic maintenance and common courtesy. That's when I made the casual observation that would trigger the galaxy's second major panic attack in less than a week. Besides, I added, it's not like I'm the only human who knows how to fix things. We've got about 8 billion people on this planet, and most of them are at least as competent as I am. The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the sound of several alien diplomats simultaneously reaching for their emergency communication devices. And that's how humanity accidentally became the galaxy's most feared species, by being exactly what we've always been: a bunch of persistent, tool-using, problem-solving primates who think most problems can be fixed with enough patience, the right equipment, and maybe a decent sandwich. The galaxy is still adjusting to this revelation. I hear they're setting up a special research institute just to study what they're calling human normalcy and its potential applications to interstellar relations. Me? I went back to my job fixing hyperdrive motivators, though I did get a raise, and my business cards now read Jake Morrison, maintenance engineer and accidental galactic diplomat. It's a living.